Inside a Manhattan boardroom during a partnership meeting worth hundreds of millions of dollars, Claire Whitmore looked across the table at the black man in the worn gray suit. Then she pulled her hand back. The entire executive team watched as the powerful CEO refused to shake the hand of Oliver Hayes, a black single father she had written off as the owner of some small, struggling firm. No one dared speak. 14 days later, $500 million vanished. Clients fled. Her empire began to crumble. Who was Oliver Hayes, really? The Monday morning light over Bed-Stuy was thin and gray. When Oliver Hayes finished his coffee at the kitchen counter of a brownstone that looked no different from any other on the block, the radiator gave its small, familiar knock. Across the table, his daughter Maya, 10 years old, sat with her elbows on the wood and her chin in her hands, watching him spread butter on toast the way she always watched him, as if every ordinary morning with her father might be worth memorizing later. "Daddy, are you coming home early today?" she asked. Oliver slid the plate toward her. "Before bedtime. I promise." She studied him with the serious eyes she had inherited from her mother. Then she reached across the table and touched the cuff of his jacket, where the gray thread had frayed a little near his wrist. "Daddy, your suit looks tired." He looked down at the cuff. Then he smiled. "This suit keeps secrets, baby. That's why it's so tired." She tilted her head, as if turning the sentence over, to see if it would hold up. Then she went back to her toast. Oliver carried his cup to the sink and stood for a moment, looking through the small window at the brick wall of the neighboring building. He was 48 years old. He had been widowed for 7 years. His wife, Naomi, had died of a kind of cancer that took everything before it took her. And after the last hospital bill was paid, he had made a decision about how he would carry himself in the world. He had decided to disappear, and he had been disappearing ever since. To anyone in Bed-Stuy, Oliver Hayes was the quiet man who walked his daughter to school 3 days a week and bought a black coffee and a folded copy of the Times at the corner deli. To the small handful of people who actually knew what he did for a living, he was the founder and sole controlling partner of Hayes Global Capital, an investment fund whose assets under management had recently passed $41 billion. The fund did not advertise. It had no public-facing partners. Its name appeared in securities filings and almost nowhere else. He preferred it that way. After Naomi, he had stopped caring about the parts of his life that wanted to be seen. Oliver pulled on the charcoal jacket from the hook by the door. The lining was clean. The cuffs were soft from use. He picked up the leather briefcase that had been repaired twice in 15 years and kissed the top of Maya's head on his way out. He drove a 5-year-old sedan across the Brooklyn Bridge in the cold air of late autumn. The river was the color of slate. He had built Hayes Global Capital over 20 years on a single rule he had taught everyone who worked for him: never let the suit speak before the man does. He had said it so often in the early years that some of his analysts had begun saying it back to each other when they thought he could not hear. This morning, he was driving to a meeting that by Wall Street standards mattered. A company called Whitmore Dynamics was burning through cash, trying to expand a national rollout, and his fund had quietly become the lead investor in the rescue round. The check on the table was $500 million. For Hayes Global Capital, the number was a rounding error. For Whitmore Dynamics, it was the difference between a future and a slow public unwinding. Oliver was the only person in either building who understood both of those truths at the same time. 30 floors above Park Avenue, Claire Whitmore was already 3 hours into her day. Her office had been built to be photographed, and it usually was, by the kind of magazines that liked her sharp shoulders and her sharper opinions. She had run Whitmore Dynamics for 9 years, and she had been told by people whose praise she trusted that she was the most aggressive operator in mid-cap tech, and she had begun to believe them, which is a slower kind of trap than failure, and harder to climb out of. Her executive assistant, a careful white woman named Patricia Lowell, who had worked with Claire for 4 years and knew the choreography of her moods better than anyone alive, set the morning binder on her desk and stepped back without a word. Claire flipped through the meeting brief with the speed of someone who had stopped reading details years ago. The lead investor was listed only as Hayes Global Capital. The representative attending was marked simply as O. Hayes. Claire did not linger on the name. She rarely lingered on anything below the line of partner or principal, and the brief did not push her to. What she did consider was the size of the round. $500 million would not just save the rollout. It would buy her another 5 years at the front of every industry list she cared about. The board had been restless for 2 quarters. The stock had drifted. A failed close would not just embarrass her. It would, she suspected, give certain members of her board the excuse they had been waiting for. Her desk phone buzzed. Patricia glanced at the screen. Mr. Carver, ma'am. Claire picked up. Daniel Carver was the longest-serving member of her board, an older man with white hair and patient eyes, who had watched too many leaders in too many rooms not to recognize the shape of a critical morning. He asked in his careful way whether everything was in order for the 11 o'clock. He used the word important twice in a way that was not accidental. Don't worry, Daniel, Claire said. By noon, we'll have the money. She set the phone down. Patricia, standing near the door, registered the certainty in that voice and said nothing. She had learned a long time ago which sentences her employer wanted echoed, and which she preferred to drop into silence. This one, she let fall. Claire turned to the mirror that hung beside her credenza and adjusted the collar of her blouse. She had a small ritual before meetings of this size. She would look at her own reflection for the length of a breath and remind herself who the room was meant to belong to. The room, in her view, was always meant to belong to her. She straightened her shoulders, glanced once at the clock, and asked Patricia to make sure the conference table had fresh water and that her chair was the one she preferred. Patricia nodded and slipped out to handle it. Alone for a moment, Claire allowed herself a small, private smile. She had crushed harder deals than this one. By lunch, the round would be closed. The Whitmore Dynamics lobby was all marble and brushed steel, the kind of space designed to remind every visitor that the elevators above them carried people whose time was more expensive than their own. Oliver walked in at 12 minutes before the hour, set his briefcase by his shin, and gave his name to the receptionist behind the long counter. She looked up. She looked at him. Then she looked at her screen. Then she looked at him again, the way a person looks at a printed name, when the face in front of them does not match whatever face the screen had prepared her to expect. She asked him to repeat his name. He did. She asked him to spell his last. He did that too. She typed, frowned, picked up the phone, and spoke quietly to someone on the other end. Then she waved a younger woman over from the visitor desk. The two of them spoke in low voices while Oliver waited. They did not say anything to him. He noticed that the man in the $1,000 overcoat, who arrived 2 minutes after him, was waved through to the elevators, without his name being checked. He noticed the way the receptionist's eyes returned to his briefcase, as if the leather itself had told her something. He noticed all of it the way he noticed weather. A security officer in a black blazer approached him. The officer was polite, but his voice carried the firm cadence of someone who had been told to confirm something. Sir, are you certain you're in the right building? Whitmore Dynamics is upstairs. I'm certain, Oliver said. I have an appointment at 11. The officer asked for a photo ID. Oliver had watched 2 other guests check in during the 10 minutes he had been standing there. Neither had been asked for one. He produced his license without comment. The officer thanked him and walked back to the desk and conferred again. After another long stretch, a young receptionist named Janelle came around from the visitor station with a printed guest badge. She was a black woman in her late 20s, and she did not need to say anything for Oliver to understand that she had seen this scene play out in this lobby before. She handed him the badge with both hands. I'll walk you up myself, Mr. Hayes. She led him to the executive elevator, 3 respectful paces ahead, the way you walk someone through a place you wish they did not have to walk through alone. She pressed the button for the 30th floor. They stood side by side as the doors closed. In the mirrored panel at the back of the elevator, Oliver looked at himself. The charcoal suit, the neat collar, the face his daughter had touched that morning. He had walked through 100 lobbies, like the one downstairs. He had learned a long time ago that the height of a tower had no real relationship to the height of the people inside it. He had also learned that the lobby was almost always more honest than the boardroom. As the elevators slowed at the 30th floor, Janelle turned her head slightly toward him, without quite looking at him. "Good luck up there, sir," she said. It was not the kind of thing a receptionist needed to say at the start of an ordinary business meeting. He understood what it meant. He nodded once. "Thank you, Janelle." She blinked, surprised that he had read her name from her badge. The doors opened. He stepped out alone. The boardroom of Whitmore Dynamics had been designed to intimidate. A single black table stretched almost the length of the room. Around it sat 12 people, all of them senior. Daniel Carver sat halfway down the right side. Elaine Marsh, the chief financial officer, sat to Claire's right, with a leather folder closed in front of her. Claire entered last, by design. She took her seat at the head of the table and did not greet anyone. Patricia stepped just inside the side door where she always stationed herself for high-stakes meetings. Then the main door opened, and Oliver Hayes walked in. The shift in the room was small but visible. Eyes traveled from the cuff of his jacket to the briefcase, to the calm face above the collar, to the dark skin at his hands and his throat. Two of the younger executives exchanged a glance. A man at the end of the table allowed himself a half-smile. Claire did not even pretend to mask her assessment. Her gaze moved over Oliver, the way someone might inspect a folding chair, brought into a room full of leather ones. Oliver walked to the empty seat across from her, set his briefcase down, and extended his hand across the table. The gesture was simple, professional, the same one any man would offer at any meeting in any city in the country. Claire looked at the offered hand. Then she looked at his face. Then she let her own hand stay flat on the surface of the table. "I think there's been a mistake," she said. Her voice carried down the length of the room because she meant it to. "I was told the lead investor was sending someone senior. I wasn't expecting whoever handles their mailroom." A short, uncomfortable laugh escaped from somewhere down the table. It died quickly when no one else joined it. She tilted her head slightly. "Mr. Hayes, if that's really your name, we're a $6 billion company. I find it hard to believe a fund I've never heard of sent you to close a deal of this size." Oliver did not lower his hand right away. He let it hang in the air for a beat longer, long enough that everyone in the room had time to register that it had not been taken. Then he returned it to his side. "Oliver Hayes," he said evenly. "Hayes Global Capital. I'm here for the 11 o'clock. He sat down. He opened his briefcase. He took out a single folder. He placed it face down on the table in front of him. He did not open it. "I came here because I was told this meeting mattered to your company. I assumed the courtesy of a handshake came with that." Daniel Carver leaned forward slightly, as if to speak. Then he stopped himself, but his eyes moved to Claire in a different way than they had before, and Elaine Marsh kept her gaze locked on the leather folder in front of her. Claire smiled, the small, tight smile she used in negotiations. "Mr. Hayes, let me be clear. I don't have time for theater. People like you don't walk into rooms like this and dictate terms to me." The sentence dropped into the room like a stone into still water. The ripples reached every chair before they stopped. Oliver said nothing for a long stretch of seconds. He looked at Claire across the black expanse of table. He looked at the 11 other faces around her, every one of them avoiding his eyes. Then he closed the folder he had never opened and slid it back into his briefcase. "I see," he said. He stood up. He buttoned the single button on his jacket. "Thank you for your time." That was all he gave her. He did not raise his voice. He did not defend himself. He did not name his firm again, or its size. He simply turned, walked the length of the table without looking at anyone, and left through the same door he had entered. Patricia stepped aside silently as he passed. The boardroom remained still after the door closed behind him. Claire let out a short breath that was almost a laugh. "Well," she said to no one in particular. That was easier than expected. Daniel Carver did not laugh. He looked down at the legal pad in front of him and wrote one small line and underlined it once. In the corridor outside, Patricia caught up with Oliver halfway to the executive elevator. She was the kind of assistant who had learned over years of working for a difficult person how to apologize without ever saying the word in public. At the elevator, she found her voice. "Mr. Hayes, I am so deeply sorry. That should not have happened." He looked at her with the same calm he had carried into the boardroom. "You don't owe me anything, ma'am, but thank you for saying it." The doors chimed. He stepped inside alone. The mirrored panel on the back wall returned a level reflection of the man Claire Whitmore had just publicly refused. He reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and took out his phone. He dialed the second number on his contact list. Marcus Reed, the chief financial officer of Hayes Global Capital, picked up on the first ring, the way he always did when the call was from Oliver. He had been with the firm for 16 years. He knew before a single word was spoken that something had happened. "Marcus," Oliver said. His voice was quiet, deliberate, no anger in it at all. "Pull our position from the Whitmore round. All of it. The full 500. There was the briefest catch on the other end of the line. "Understood. The follow-on funds stacked behind us will move within the hour." "I know. Start a quiet position in their nearest competitor. The Pierce Group, out of Boston. I'll send the rest after lunch." "Got it." Oliver ended the call and dialed again. The second call went to the firm's outside counsel. He asked for a short press release to be drafted by the end of the day. The third call went to the head of human resources. Oliver had been thinking for months about a small mentorship initiative he had not yet authorized. He authorized it now. He stepped out into the cold air of Park Avenue. He thanked Janelle by name as he returned the guest badge. That evening, the brownstone in bed stew smelled like the chicken Oliver had started in the slow cooker before he left in the morning. Maya was waiting on the stoop in her coat. She launched herself into his arms before he could set down his briefcase. "Daddy, I got an A on the math test." "Of course you did." She held up a folded paper for him to admire. Then her face shifted slightly, the way her face shifted when she was choosing whether to share something. "A boy in my class said something today." "What did he say?" "He said you must drive an Uber because he saw your car." She was not crying. She was looking up at him with the eyes of a child who was trying to figure something out and had decided he was the best person to help her figure it out. "Daddy, why do people think they know who we are just by looking?" Oliver knelt down on the brownstone steps so that his face was level with hers. He thought for a long time before he answered. "Because looking is easier than seeing, baby, and most people are tired. But you don't ever have to explain yourself to someone who refuses to see. You hear me?" She nodded gravely. He carried her inside. Later that night, after she was in bed, Oliver sat in the small office on the second floor of the brownstone. On the desk was a framed photograph of Naomi, taken the summer before she got sick. He did not say anything to the photograph. He touched the top of the frame once with 2 fingers and turned off the lamp. On Wall Street, the unwind paperwork had been filed before lunch. A clock had begun to tick that no one on the 30th floor could yet hear. The first 48 hours after the meeting passed quietly, and Claire Whitmore took that quiet as proof that she had been right. She spent Tuesday in back-to-back internal reviews. She spent Wednesday in a press appearance she'd been preparing for weeks. She wore navy. She smiled exactly the right amount. She referred to the upcoming funding round as a sure thing on schedule, and the room of reporters wrote it down. On Thursday morning, the call came in from the bank handling the close. Elaine Marsh read the notice twice before she stood up from her desk. She walked to Claire's office without knocking. Patricia tried to intercept her at the door. Elaine held up the printed page and said only one word. Patricia stepped aside. Claire read the page in silence. She did not raise her voice. She did not throw anything. She set the paper down on her desk, smoothed it flat with the palm of her hand, and asked Elaine to bring her the contact list for every follow-on investor stacked behind the Hayes position. Elaine already had the list in her other hand. By the end of the day, Claire had personally called 9 of them. 7 did not pick up. The 2 who did were polite and brief. Each used a different version of the same sentence. Without Hayes Global Capital leading the round, the deal was no longer attractive. Each apologized for the timing. Each ended the call before she could finish her counter. Claire stood at the window of her office after the last call and looked out across the city. She did not yet understand what was happening, but she had spent enough years in her chair to know the shape of it. A round did not collapse like this unless someone had decided it should collapse. The follow-on funds had not been spooked. They had been told. She turned back to her desk and asked Patricia to find out by any means necessary who exactly Oliver Hayes was. Patricia had already been working on it. She had been working on it since Tuesday afternoon. The file she placed on Claire's desk an hour later was thin, which was itself the answer. Hayes Global Capital did not advertise. It had no front-facing partners. It did not appear in the kinds of magazines Claire trusted, but the assets under management, when Patricia finally found a reliable number buried in a securities filing, were just over $41 billion. The lead position in the Whitmore round had been a rounding error inside that fund. The fact that Oliver had committed it at all had been a quiet courtesy. Claire read the number 3 times. Then she sat down in her chair slowly, the way someone sits when their legs have stopped trusting them. Patricia stayed by the door in case she was needed, and also because she did not want to be the one to walk out first. "Why didn't anyone tell me?" Claire said finally. It was not a question. It was not aimed at anyone in the room. Patricia answered anyway. "Because it was her job to. Because he doesn't let his name out, ma'am. The fund operates through layers of holding entities. Most people in this industry have never seen his face. The brief listed him only as O. Hayes because that is the only way he is ever listed." Claire looked at the page again. The blood moved out of her face slowly, the way water leaves a glass with a hairline crack. All at once, and yet not all at once. That weekend, the news cycle began to turn. A small business publication ran the first piece. The headline was careful. It described the unexpected collapse of the Whitmore Dynamics rescue round, and noted, in the 3rd paragraph, that the lead investor had withdrawn shortly after a meeting at the company's headquarters. The reporter had no quotes from Hayes Global Capital. He did not need them. The story spread to larger outlets within a day. By the following Monday, the stock had opened 9% down. By Wednesday, it had given back another 7. 2 of the company's largest enterprise clients placed unscheduled calls to Claire's office to ask, in the careful language of people preparing to leave, whether their service agreements were stable. She told them yes. She was not sure they believed her. In Boston, a man named Jonathan Pierce denounced that his firm had received a substantial new investment from a strategic partner and would be accelerating its national rollout. He did not name the partner. He did not have to. Anyone in the market who could read a balance sheet understood within an hour what had happened. The $500 million that had walked out of the Whitmore boardroom had walked directly into the office of Whitmore's nearest competitor. That same morning, a single short press release went out from Hayes Global Capital. It was the first public statement the firm had issued in 3 years. It contained no names and no figures. The final line, the one that would be screen-grabbed and reposted for weeks, said simply, "We do not partner with organizations that fail to respect people." The press understood that sentence before Claire did. A senior reporter at a national business weekly, working a tip, began calling former employees of Whitmore Dynamics. The first 3 did not return her messages. The 4th, a man named Thomas Bryant, returned her call within an hour. He was a black executive who had left the company 18 months earlier under a strict separation agreement, and he had been waiting, in his own quiet way, for someone to ask. He met her at a coffee shop 2 blocks from Grand Central. He spoke for 90 minutes. He told her about the way Claire had once told a procurement manager, named Hector Reyes, that his suit told her everything she needed to know about why his department was failing. He told her about a vendor relationship that had been killed because the owner of the vendor company had, in Claire's words to the room afterward, looked like he did not belong in their building. The owner had been black. Thomas remembered that detail because he had been the only other black executive in the room at the time and had spent the rest of the day wondering whether the sentence had also been about him. The reporter asked whether anyone else might be willing to speak. Thomas gave her 4 names. 3 of them, when contacted, agreed to speak on the record. The 4th declined but offered, through a careful intermediary, 3 audio files, internal recordings, voices that were unmistakably Claire's, phrases that would not survive a single news cycle once they were played out loud. The first audio clip appeared online on the Monday morning of the 2nd week. Claire was in a car on her way to a client breakfast when her communications director called her. She listened to 30 seconds of the recording over the speaker. She told the driver to turn around. Back in her office, she listened to all 3 files in order. The first was bad. The second was worse. The third was a recording of her in a smaller meeting room on the same floor, where she had refused to shake Oliver Hayes' hand, telling a young black associate that he should consider leaving the industry for something more suited to his background. She sat in her chair for a long time after the last file ended. Patricia stood in the doorway and waited to be sent away. Claire did not send her away. She did not say anything at all. The clients began leaving in earnest the next morning. A retail account that had been with the company for 11 years sent a termination letter by close of business. A logistics partner moved its contract to a competitor the following day. The competitor, in 3 out of 4 cases, was the company Jonathan Pierce now ran in Boston. Inside Whitmore Dynamics, a different kind of leaving started. 2 senior vice presidents resigned within the same 48 hours, citing personal reasons that no one believed. The head of corporate communications quit on a Thursday and was working at a peer firm by Monday. Claire stopped sleeping well. She did not show it in any way that the cameras could catch. She still wore navy. She still smiled exactly the right amount when she had to. But the smile no longer reached the rest of her face, and the people who knew her well had stopped pretending not to notice. On the morning of the 14th day after the original meeting, the company's stock opened down another 12%. On the news that a 4th major client had terminated its contract. The market capitalization of Whitmore Dynamics, which had been above $6 billion on the morning Claire had refused to shake a hand, was now sitting below 3. Daniel Carver placed a call from his office to the chair of the board's audit committee. The conversation took 40 minutes. By the end of it, the chair had agreed to convene an emergency session that afternoon. The notice went out by encrypted email to all 11 sitting directors at 11:30 in the morning. The meeting was set for 2. The location was the same boardroom on the 30th floor. The agenda listed only one item: a vote of confidence in the current chief executive officer. Patricia received a copy of the notice as part of her standard role. She read it once. She read it again. Then she walked into Claire's office and set the printed copy on the desk without speaking. Claire read it without picking it up. The 2 women looked at each other across the desk. Whatever Patricia had wanted to say in the elevator hallway 2 weeks earlier on Oliver's way out, she did not need to say now. The notice on the desk said it for her. Claire stood up. She walked to the closet at the side of her office. She took down the navy jacket she had been planning to wear to a client dinner that evening. She put it on slowly, one arm and then the other, with a careful movement of a person who suspects correctly that the next few hours will not allow her to change again. She buttoned it. She smoothed the lapel. At 2 minutes before 2, she walked out of her office and down the long corridor to the boardroom. The directors were already inside, seated in the same chairs they had occupied on the morning of the Hayes meeting. The hand she had refused to shake was no longer in the room, but everything else was. And every person at that table now knew exactly which version of that morning would be written into the company's official history. Hers was not the version they had chosen. The vote took 22 minutes. Claire was given the courtesy of speaking first, and she used 8 of those minutes to defend the record the room had already finished evaluating. She did not mention the meeting on the 30th floor. She did not mention the hand she had refused to shake. The directors listened without interrupting. When she finished, the chair of the audit committee called the vote. It was 9-2. The other 9 did not look at her when their names were called. Rebecca Stone voted last. Her voice was steady. Claire was given 15 minutes to clear her personal effects. Patricia had a single cardboard box from the supply room waiting on the desk by the time Claire arrived. There was no shouting between them. There was no apology either. 2 security officers walked her to the elevator at a respectful distance. By the time she stepped out onto Park Avenue, the cameras were waiting. A woman in a navy jacket, a cardboard box held against her chest. She walked to a black car at the curb and got in. The story ended that day with a single photograph and a headline that would still be searchable years later. The company lost more than half of its market value over the following 3 months. The rollout was canceled. 2 more enterprise clients walked. A new chief executive was brought in from outside, a quiet operator with a reputation for stabilizing damaged firms. Whitmore Dynamics survived. It became, eventually, a different company. The name above the door stayed. The culture inside it did not. Claire did not appear in public for the first 90 days after the vote. She moved out of the corner apartment on the Upper East Side and into a smaller place farther uptown, on a street where no one recognized her. She did not take meetings. She did not return the calls of the few friends who still called. She read the press coverage in the first 2 weeks, and then stopped. Because there is a point past which a person can no longer learn anything useful from reading about herself. She spent a great deal of those 90 days at a window that looked out over a courtyard with one tree in it. She thought, more than she had ever thought in her adult life, about a single morning on the 30th floor. She thought about the hand across the table. She thought about the 11 faces that had not looked at her when the vote was called. What she had told herself in the first week was that she had been betrayed. By the board, by the press, by a man who had walked into her boardroom in an old suit. By the time the second month ended, she had stopped telling herself that, because the story did not hold together when she said it out loud, even to herself. What had happened was simpler than betrayal and harder to live with. She had built a career on the idea that she could read a person the moment they walked through a door. She had been proud of that skill. She had taught it to younger executives as if it were a form of wisdom. What she understood now was that she had not been reading people at all. She had been reading clothing and watches and the cut of a jacket and the color of skin. She had mistaken the surface for the substance for so long that she had forgotten there was a difference. In Brooklyn, Oliver Hayes had returned to a routine that looked, from the outside, exactly the same as it had before the meeting. He drove the same 5-year-old sedan. He drank his coffee at the same counter on Atlantic Avenue. He carried the same repaired briefcase. The people at the corner deli still did not know, and never would know, what the man buying the folded copy of the Times had set in motion the previous month. Inside Hayes Global Capital, however, something had shifted. He told Marcus on a Monday morning that he wanted to allocate a new fund, $100 million to start. It would invest in small companies and individual operators who had been overlooked, dismissed, or underestimated by the larger institutions. The diligence criteria would not be the usual ones. The fund would be looking for people, not pedigrees. The fund made its first 3 investments before the end of the quarter. The first was in a logistics company run by a Mexican-American man Claire had 2 years earlier declined to take a meeting with on the grounds that his company was too small. The second was in a software firm founded by a Vietnamese-American woman who had been laid off from a larger firm because, in the words of her exit review, she did not present well in front of clients. The third was in a manufacturing operation in Pennsylvania, whose owner was a Black Army veteran who had been turned away from 4 investment banks before Oliver's office returned his call within an hour. 6 months after the vote, Rebecca Stone accepted a speaking slot at a business ethics panel hosted by a university in Manhattan. The audience was mostly graduate students. She did not name Claire, but she did not need to. She told the story of a boardroom on the 30th floor, of a handshake that had not happened, and of 11 people, herself included, who had sat at the table and said nothing. She apologized publicly, by name, to Oliver Hayes. He was not in the room. The recording of her statement was online within hours. Oliver watched it that evening alone in his office. He did not respond publicly. He sent Rebecca, through Marcus, a short private note. It said only, "Thank you." She kept it. A year, almost to the day, after the meeting on the 30th floor, a business conference in Midtown invited Oliver to give a keynote address. He had declined every such invitation for 2 decades. He accepted this one. The organizers printed his name in larger letters than they had ever printed anyone's name, and sold every seat in the hall within a week. He walked onto the stage in a charcoal suit. It was not the same suit. The old one had been retired the previous summer at Marcus's insistence, but it was cut the same way. He carried no notes. He spoke for 31 minutes. He did not mention Whitmore Dynamics. He did not mention Claire. He talked about the businesses he had backed in the last year, about the people who built things in this country who did not get written about in the magazines he had stopped reading a long time ago. He talked briefly about his daughter, who was 11 now, learning to solve quadratic equations and writing short stories about a girl who discovered that her father loved her more than any secret he had ever kept. At the end, the moderator asked the question the audience had been waiting to hear asked. What was the single thing that had made him successful? The room went quiet in the specific way. Rooms go quiet when they expect an answer they will, quote, Later, Oliver did not answer right away. He looked down at his hands on the lectern. He looked back up. People judge too quickly what they see in front of them, he said. I have spent 30 years trying not to be one of those people. Some days I succeed. Some days I do not. The work is in the trying. The room held that sentence for a moment before it began to applaud. The applause was not loud. It was the kind of applause that comes from a room that has just been told something it already knew and had not heard said aloud in a long time. Claire did not attend. She watched the keynote later, on a laptop uptown. She had drafted a letter to Oliver 3 different times and not sent it. She understood eventually that the letter was for her, that whatever apology she owed, the person she owed it to was not on the other end of an envelope. It was every junior associate she had told to consider leaving the industry, every vendor she had dismissed for the way he looked, every employee who had learned from her that the surface of a person and the color of their skin was the only part of that person worth reading. That night in Bed-Stuy, Oliver came home from the conference and unlocked the front door of the brownstone. Maya was waiting for him on the bottom step of the stairs in her pajamas, having clearly negotiated her bedtime so she could be the one to open the door. She launched herself at him before his briefcase touched the floor. Daddy, did you remember to shake everyone's hand tonight? He smiled. He set the briefcase down. He crouched down so that his face was level with hers and held her shoulders gently. Every single one, baby. Every single one. She wrapped her arms around his neck. He carried her upstairs. In business and in life, respect carries more weight than power. A person should never be measured by what is visible at first glance. Because sometimes the quietest person in the room, in the most ordinary suit, with the darkest skin, is the one who holds the future of everyone else in it. And the hand that gets refused today has a memory longer than any boardroom.